In the dark shadows, in the white cold, fearlessly we search for knowledge new and old. We drink the strong spirits and read the ancient tomes. The order of the Abracast. We are the brave and the bold.
Hey, before we get started this evening, I want to talk a little bit about the cabin fever combat link on my website to help fight the boredom as we are stuck in our homes as this media fueled panic spreads across the country. I thought that I would post one of my graphic novels, The Jinn Jihad, on the website for free. It's just an attempt to help pass some time, and I hope you enjoy it. It's going to be a long, I don't know, X amount of weeks, guys. So this is my first my first shot in the dark to kind of try to help everybody. So just go to the Cabin Fever Combat link on the website, and I have it busted down into chapters, and I thought that might help pace it. You know, if you got into it, you could just read one a day, and that'll get you through at least a week. Because I think there's 6 chapters, and then there's a prologue and an epilogue. So, yeah. So I busted it down into chapters, so you could just do like one a day or however much you want. With that being said, I hope everybody is being safe and sound. And remember, it's just the fucking media. Actually, if you listen till the end of the show, we can talk a little bit more about that. But if you don't want to hear it, if you're fucking sick of it, just chill, bro. Just when the show ends, it ends. But if you want to stick around, stick around. I'm John. This is the Abercast, and this is a great episode, guys. Anthony Tyler's returning. So here it is. I'll let you get to it.
The Abercast. Occult, history, conspiracy, and violence.
It's that time again. The party's over. The fire is low. All the ordinary people went to bed, and we are the only ones left. Recording straight from the Pillar of Severity, the ritual space underneath the Stigmata Studios building, located in the heart of the Steel City. I am John Towers, and this is the Abercast. So welcome aboard, everybody. Thank you for joining us this evening. We have a great guest on the phone, Anthony Tyler. Anthony is a writer. He's a self-described heuristic mystic. Anthony's returning to us tonight to talk about his book, The Dive Manual, Empirical Investigations of Mysticism. Welcome back, Anthony, and sorry for stepping on your last name there. And welcome back. Congratulations on the book, dude.
Thank you very much, and it's a real pleasure to be back, homie. I've been looking forward to this conversation. So, and yeah, as far as heuristic mystic goes, I don't really, I don't buddy up too hard with any labels in particular, but I like to use that term because it really, it's something easy for people to grab a hold of, even if they might have to, a lot of people haven't heard of the term heuristic, but it is an easily Googleable word. So, and it's something that captures a lot of the concepts I'm tossing out quite concisely. So, yeah, heuristic mysticism.
Yeah. So.
Yeah,
why don't you go ahead and just throw a little definition on there?
Yeah, so first of all, heuristics is an evolutionary study. It's almost similar to to like memetics and I feel like often does denote mimetic theory in the way that symbols are used virally throughout culture, and whether it be good or bad. And heuristics are these trial and error, self-educating learning methods that we develop. And it's often characterized through folklore and symbolism and mysticism and religion. And honestly, a lot of people, there's a lot of leading minds out there, such as I could recommend to anybody the debates between the neuroscientist Sam Harris and the clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson. Think what you will of their politics. They're both very, very educated and interesting and open-minded people. They have hard stances on certain things, but they're certainly willing to talk about them. And the heuristic approach is something that they really drive home in those debates, because they're not really trying to tear each other apart. They're trying to find some sort of common ground. And that is so as something easy for the mind to grab a hold of, a really simple, like a simple heuristic thing to get a hold of is most people, at least a lot of people, maybe not most per se, but there's a really common misconception that even today that porcupines shoot their quills, and they do not. They don't at all. But if you think that they shoot their quills, you're probably more likely to stay away from them, and you'll probably be better off for thinking that. So it's one of those things that it might not be entirely true, but the end justifies the means, so to speak, in the fact that you're more adaptive. It's a pro-adaptive, self-educating method, I guess. So, and then mysticism being the direct union, some sort of acquiescence of divine inspiration, whether it be, gnosis is a good way to describe it, but if you're looking for more modern, like scientific terms, just the sense of transpersonality. That's the term I like to use. It's this state, a deep hypnotic state, and it's a place where, if you want a metaphor, I always love to think of it as like, well, the dive is certainly the best metaphor, but I also like to think of it as like my little alchemy station. Like I'm getting up to the beakers and burners of my psyche itself. So heuristic mysticism. Yeah,
that's good. That's good stuff. So we spoke about your book the last time you were on the show, and I think it's important just to remind the folks that I love how your book opens, where you're like, well, I don't have it written down or I don't have it memorized, but it's like, this isn't, you're not going to find like a peaceful warrior path, like this isn't like new age stuff.
Right.
And I really do appreciate that. We spoke last time about kind of the new age, sort of kind of fucking up like the occult, or like this kind of material, so just to put that in the front of everybody's head, like this isn't like a traditional new agey kind of self-help book. And I think we're gonna stumble on some of the differences like right off the bat. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I guess I'll just elaborate a little bit and say, I'm in the long run, it's not as if I'm opposed to like peace or love or bliss. I mean, those things are things that everyone should strive for. They're healthy when to accept them and be able to enjoy them when the opportunities come around. But the point to drive home is that you have to be willing to. You have to follow your blisters to find the bliss eventually. And if you don't understand and accept that process, then it's just going to be ignorance, which is a different form of bliss, and not one I would recommend.
No. So your so your kind of path, your journey in your book is kind of, well, the way that I look at it when I reread it in preparation for this, and it's all about it's largely about confronting like your shadow self, right? Would you,
Yes,
is that fair to say?
absolutely.
Okay, so in the part titled The Thirst, you talk in depth about stuff that we've been talking about lately on the show, namely free will and determinism.
Hmm.
And as Crowley, writing as the master Therion, would say, doing what you will doesn't necessarily mean doing anything that you want.
Right.
And I was hoping that you could kind of talk about or explain your point of view about this free will and determinism as it applies to your story.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, as the names I brought up before, Peterson and Harris, they um, have. I've thought about this subject for many years at this point, and feel like they articulated it quite well in those very same debates. And they didn't quite flesh it out, because there's only so much fleshing that you can do amidst debating like that. But they were stabbing in the right direction, and I really feel like the data suggests that the our state of what you would call free will is something like a shoreline. There's a huge ebb and flow, and I think it almost goes without saying, not quite, but almost, that we are compiled of so many instinctual drives and biological necessities that we can't really afford as much free will as we would like to believe that we can. It's simply just not in our operating system. There are needs that need to be met regardless of like you're gonna have to eat and breathe and sleep if you want to keep living. So there's really no question, and those things will alter your state of consciousness given the amount you have or lack thereof. And that also expands and encompasses the emotional spectrum far more than we would like to believe oftentimes. And that's where things like phantom limbs of the psyche, like neurophantoms, I kind of like to call them, they're very tangible and real. There's a real question whether or not they're sentient or just autonomous, or how many would be sentient and how many are autonomous. But the point is actually that all of them are autonomous demonstrably through the neurophenomenology of the events. You can identify them. You can see their trail of breadcrumbs in our neurons and synapses. So, but there is that free will is the way I see it. If nothing else, and it might only be this, it's that a priori sense of self, like the fact that we are able to experience and have a position on anything indicates some sort of soul and indicates some sort of free will. Just the fact that an addict can actually get clean and stay clean, even if it's not as many as we would like, that still does happen. I'm sure you know some. I certainly know some, and and they're some of the most powerful and humble people that I've ever met. They're some of the most genuine people I've ever met, and I think that's a testament to the human spirit and free will. 100%. I find it. I don't really come across many people who can really disagree with that. So I feel like that's a real pillar of the argument if you want to find a strongest example. But you have to work really hard. Again, addiction being a great example. Free will is not an easy thing to attain. It's a discipline, and it's something that the less you work at it, the less you will have. I can promise anybody that. And the book goes into a great amount of detail describing that and why that's the case. And oftentimes, the more you follow your bliss, the less free will you really do have.
Yeah, I kind of think about it I kind of think about this free will kind of question. Like in my kind of simple brain, I think about it as like, when you watch like little kids at the bowling alley and they have like those gutter guards and they just have the ball and it just depends on how you throw the ball.
Right.
Like the speed and the angle, like it's going to be bouncing around the sides. Like that's kind of like how free will seems like it is to me. Like you're only free within this certain kind of construct of these gutter guards,
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. I would say that I couldn't find any way to disagree with that.
Okay, so I want to kind of jump ahead a little bit. So the last time you were on, we talked a little bit about the lack of initiation in our current kind of culture. And you in your book, you break down what happens or what is supposed to happen or what is happening during these initiations. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk about that and also about your initiation kind of rituals, because I missed that the first time I had you on, and I love the story about your Blue Lodge.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I had to put this chapter in there because I'm still pretty young, even though I've been studying these concepts for a long time. And I'll preface this by saying, like, I was literally reading about your cryptozoology for starters and some starter philosophy from like elementary school. Some of it was on the side and it was always an interest, and it just kept growing. And by the time high school got around, I was reading a lot of pretty technical philosophy, and I was getting into some Freud and eventually Jung. And there's just stuff I always thought that stuff was interesting. Like, I loved comic books and horror films too. Like I loved the idea of being invested in some sort of network of ideas and different minds, philosophy and psychology being such a similar network to all the different like comic book illustrators and writers. So my mind really clicked with it in that way, I think. And because I grew up with comic books since I was a baby. I had like Spider-Man toys in the crib, man. So anyway, I was lucky enough to come across some really good friends who I'm still pretty much in contact with, any given one of them. And some of them were always interested in these things, like more than others. But I don't know, maybe it was just like something in the air in Alaska, growing up outside of Anchorage. There some really cool guys who were just really into some zany stuff. Like, we talked about everything. I learned about I learned about people like DeLubix. I don't know how you pronounce that, but that's how I pronounce it. And you know what I'm talking about, right? R.A. Schwale DeLubix, however you say that. You
no, man, it's new to me.
Oh, that's a great source material right there. I believe he was definitely like an esoteric philosopher, and I believe he did a little bit of archaeology as well, although I could be misremembering that. But yeah, and I'll send you some stuff. I have like one quote from him in the book, but he's not as heavy as a source. But anyway, so I learned about classic esotericists, even Manly P. Hall from friends of mine who were like also like 20 years old. So I feel like that was a rare thing that I'm very thankful for, and it's something that really helped me steamroll into this stuff all the more. And I'm definitely the friend of mine that took it to the next level, getting a book out there and stuff. But that's all important to say, because it builds into this initiatory quality, because it's something that has to be. It doesn't necessarily happen all at once. In fact, in today's society, it usually almost never happens all at once, and that's an unfortunate disservice, I feel like.
Yeah, can I jump in for a second?
Yeah, go for it.
So in your book, the way that you start explaining all of this stuff, it is really effective, because you kind of make it seem like Alaska, you really bring out like the otherworldness of it, like trying to explain the like how much dark it is, and then like the sun never going down, for that long period of time, and it kind of like puts you in this weird space where you're like, I can't even relate to that, like like the amount of like seasonal depression, and you like you mentioned the trash bags on the windows, not because people were shut-ins, but because people couldn't sleep because the sun's been out for a month.
Right, yeah, absolutely. I appreciate
So
that.
it's already like, yeah, you're already kind of like in this sort of like liminal state, or like on the edge of kind of like what reality or what our minds are supposed to be able to handle anyways. And then you introduce this idea about the forested area, and I thought that all that stuff was just brilliant the way it was conveyed.
Yeah, man. Well, thank you. And Alaska is exactly, everything that you just said is spot on. It's a wild place that your body never fully adjusts to ever. It's a very like alien environment almost. And there's some times where it's absolutely gorgeous. It's like a paradise, but you have to you have to almost suffer through like 8 or so months, and then you get like a month of that's okay, and then like 3 months of just pure beauty where it's like solid 70 degrees. It only rains a little bit. Like it just rains enough sometimes to help the plants, so you're not getting soaked like in Washington or something. And
Right.
And there's so few things that can withstand that winter. So when you get to the summer, and you do the things that we did, like taking like really potent mushroom teas, psychedelic teas, and going into the woods at night, you didn't have to worry about snakes or ticks or fleas or any of that stuff. You just kind of had to. Usually, you had to worry about like bears and moose and stuff. But in our case, which is why we did it, we were smart in our planning. So there's this like wilderness behind my house, and it was close enough to the neighborhoods and even a pretty busy grocery store to have like no wildlife near it at all. But the woods were so dense that like you just had to walk right into them, and all of a sudden you were in a completely different place.
So before you get to the mushrooms in the woods thing, kind of set up the lodge and your group of friends a little bit.
Oh, right. Okay. So we ended up kind of stumbling onto this whole motif of initiation found in the works of people like Jung. And one of the most useful things that Joseph Campbell has proposed, different people like that. And we were also looking into Freemasonic philosophy. We found a lot of it interesting. We weren't sure how much, if any, Freemasons were running the world, stuff like that. And it became this, we started like creating our own pseudo lodge, of where the experiences and the tenacity at which we met up and discussed things, it was very authentic, but I use pseudo in the technical sense. It was definitely not any sort of organized Masonic lodge.
Right.
And, we were all like 20 to 23, maybe a couple people older, not really younger than that though. And we would just meet up and talk about the things that we had researched. We all enjoyed different entertainments as well, but we were pretty not easily amused by a lot of that stuff. And the Alaskan winters get really, really dark and cold. It's brutal. Like most of it you can kind of get through okay. It's not really a big deal, but when you get into January and February, it feels like it's never going to end. Even the strongest people are starting to break during January and February. So, you just got to fill your mind. It's either drugs and debauchery, or you find things that are like really gripping, like art and research and stuff. And we did a little bit of both, because there's a lot of psychedelics involved from time to time. We didn't. I'm thankful at the rate at which we used them, because we kind of rode the line at times, but it never really got into what you would call drug abuse. We were pretty ceremonial with it, and we respected the chemicals. But I don't really want to glorify them, and I don't necessarily recommend them. Although there are certain cases where I suppose I would, most certainly. See, there's just misconceptions with the psychedelic chemical. It doesn't necessarily, it might not go as far back as some people say, just because there's actually a lot of American propaganda involved with a lot of this stuff, and it's you look into people like Timothy Leary and
Terrence McKenna and all this.
Yeah, so it gets questionable without going into a whole lot of detail.
Yeah, people get real shitty when you start talking about this, by the way.
yeah, and I am happy to die on that hill. For real, man, because those people need to settle down and get in touch with reality a little bit more. And man, I will still use a mushroom from time to time, but there is a time and a place, and it's a medicine where you shouldn't be you're not taking it to elevate yourself. It's not some sort of instant red pill. You're taking it to get a little better wherewithal, I guess. The ancients really, when you look at when you look more into the historical evidence, they were using it to almost like bring people back from the brink. It was a serious medicine to kind of kickstart your immune system and your psychological programming. It wasn't meant for, or the mystics. There were definitely mystics using it, but when they were administering it to regular people, that it was more meant for that. It wasn't a bunch of people tripping out all the time per se.
Right.
I mean, and I'm not necessarily, before we go back more into initiation, I'm not saying that people didn't even maybe use psychedelics in the evolutionary curve. That's kind of an interesting idea, and might be some weight to that. I'm just saying, let's slow the roll on psychedelics being this ultimate savior, because it's a little much. So anyway, we would take them ceremonially from time to time. In the winters, it'd be more so, and we would warm up. We would always take tea, mushroom tea, and we would let that kind of build, and then we would go outside into the woods and just kind of let come what may. And I didn't realize even until retrospect how Dantean it was. Very that's the opening scene in the Divine Comedy where he's wandering through the woods, and it's certainly an allegory for the human soul in the physical world itself. And there's a whole lot of history behind the woods being, the place of all the monsters and demons and the witches out there dancing around the fires. And we saw all sorts of stuff out there. And it was never something that we were particularly going out and looking for. We weren't taking mushrooms to go out and see some wild stuff. We just went out to, like I said, let come what may, really. And sometimes it was not as intense as this, but there were so many times where we saw, there were people hallucinating spirit animals, like grizzly bears chasing them, and
oh boy,
and speaking words at them, taunting them, and seeing Men in Black out there, and aliens and all sorts of stuff. The really vivid stuff, and we didn't realize how much we were engaging with hypnotic trance work before going out there, making these things really vivid, because it wasn't like we were taking an ounce of mushrooms or something. We were just taking enough, and these things really became allegories. The more we picked them apart, they were really deep allegories for shadow work, essentially, projections of our psyche.
Yeah, so I've never done hallucinogenics. I've never done mushrooms or anything like that. Oh, okay. But when I was in the Army, we got deployed, not seriously, it was a training problem or whatever. But a series of events happened where I basically wasn't able to sleep for 3 days. I was operating heavy machinery. I had a lot of responsibility. I was driving, I was driving an armored personnel carrier with 8 of my closest friends in it. You know what I mean? Like for 3 days, straight. And it's not like you have headlights, like you have like these little tiny slit lights on, and you have to like with your night vision goggles. And the amount, I'm also like a very creative and imaginative guy. So the amount of how quickly your mind starts finding things in the darkness and playing tricks on you is amazing, especially when you take sleep out of the equation, which kind of I think speaks to what you're talking about, like some kind of weird, close to hypnotic state or something like that.
Yeah. Also important to point out that we always did this at night as well.
Right. Yeah.
And so we also, for whatever it's worth, we had some pretty wild UFO sightings while sober, just maybe a little, definitely a little bit of weed, and I believe maybe a couple beers in there as well. But nothing that makes you hallucinate. Like we saw very vivid things. But we never anything like we never saw anything like an alien, not on a psychedelic. So just to clarify that for any listener. But the point is, you have to purge these things. You have to give these things, these neurophantoms, these phantom limbs of the psyche, some sort of imagery. And it's almost like a sympathy for the devil, as much as my mother would not like to hear me say that. She's so old school Christian, but it's not like a glorification. Like I've heard the term tossed around, demonolatry, and I find that interesting, but I think that it goes probably a little overboard. But I think that you have to there's a middle ground between some sort of straight up what you would like think of in generally speaking as a demon, something that will have some sort of at least allegorical role in really nefarious things like human sacrifice and murder and rape. And then there's the other things like addiction, that are definitely not angels. They're not good, but they're not demons. They're not like in the ways that I just described. So, and I like to think of those things in the Eastern tradition of the hungry ghost. These things that are driven by humanistic impulses that piggyback off you in a parasitic way, just by sheer inertia of your own habits. And then all of a sudden you attract these things that aren't exactly nefarious, but they're attracted to this stuff like you using a like heroin or something. They're attracted to it like a shark smelling blood in the water, So you have to, in order to get a grip of a problem that you're having, you have to diagnose it. And a lot of people just don't understand they don't have any applicable methods of diagnosing these things in any way that makes sense. The psychiatric manuals are full of all these terms, but none of them offer any real help or use. And it just seems like you're throwing labels. These people are, let's be clear, just throwing labels around to prescribe medication. It's hardly helping anybody.
Learn more at abracast.com. Get bonus content by signing up for the mailing list. Get all that plus many exclusive episodes by supporting the show at patreon.com or subscribestar.com.
Hey, just a reminder about the cabin fever combat link on the website. To help fight the boredom as we're all stuck in this oppressive quarantine zone. As this media-induced panic spreads across the country, I thought that I would post one of my graphic novels, The Jinn Jihad, on the website for free in an attempt to help you pass some time. I hope you enjoy it. All you got to do is just head over to the website, advertise.com, and click the Cabin Fever Combat link. I busted it down into chapters so you can, I thought that might help pace it, so you could just do a little bit a day. Thank you guys. And if you want to hear some coronavirus news, I don't even know what I'm going to say because I'm fucking sick of hearing it, but I have something fun planned. I have something really fun planned. So stay if you want. But if not, I will see you next week. Actually, I'll see you in a few days. Yeah, so I think that you might say something like, in order to diagnose something like this that's going on with you, like one of these like phantom limb sort of attributes, that you should pay attention to like your dreams, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of how it got. That's how it kind of got started with you, right? Like, so in the hero's journey, early on in the story, there's this call to action, like a character shows up and kind of gives you a scenario that you can either deny, like I refuse this call to action, or like a start to your journey. And in a dream, this character was a mermaid, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And I'll go ahead and preface this and say that I'm very open about the fact, and it says so in bold print in the author's notes and acknowledgments at the beginning of the book, how some of this is a semi-fictional, but I dreamt about the mermaid most significantly, and all those things, all the things that I talk about happening to me definitely did happen to me. But some of the points, other than conciseness and brevity and not wanting to bore people with semantics, some of the point of changing up the ideas was for illustrative effect, and also because I don't care if people believe me or not. That's not the point of it. The point is to illustrate the research and the data. And I want to tell a good story. So I am happy to make the disclaimer. It doesn't bother me at all. I'm not trying to fool or trick anybody. That I lend to the narrative a little bit with some of these dreams, because I really wanted to keep the continuous at sea type of metaphor. I certainly did have those dreams, but they were across the board in different ways. Like I said, they were always the same woman, the same face, the same things happening, but she took different forms, and the settings were different at times.
All right, sir. Your disclaimer is noted. Now, feel free.
Right on. So it really gets to the whole grab overall is getting to the crux of the depolarization of the psyche, and in my case, getting in touch with the anima, which you more often than not, in fact, I would argue, except for the small outliers, which you can't really account for, in order to get in touch with the opposite aspect of your psyche, you're going to have to work through the shadow, because those are all the things. The shadow represents everything that you're not conscious of, but is still registered on some level in your psyche. So that, and obviously that includes all the bad things and all the good things that you're not fully aware of. So, and negative things are always more gripping because they're more immediate, because there's some sort of danger involved, and that triggers your That goes back to the free will thing that we were talking about. So that's an important point to make as well. And so you're going to have to deal with these things first. And that's the primary principle of alchemy, whether it be psychological or like physical with chemistry or metallurgy. So these things are going to come across. You're going to find the aspects of the dark anima or animus before you come across the positive, more than likely. You might have glimpses of the positive, but you're going to have to sift through the negative. And for me, it was the mermaid, which is more broadly put a derivative of the siren in Greek mythology. And the siren is very, very interesting because it actually holds far more cultural significance than a lot of people note today. I didn't even realize until I just dove into the symbolism more after having more of these dreams of the siren. And when I looked into it more, I started to realize that even if I wasn't dreaming about the mermaid, it was all the siren across the board. And it started to, this whole Lovecraftian theme comes into the mix because you're like, what the fuck is happening? What is this thing? There's clearly something going on here. And it's not something that I have any control over, at least at this point. So I got to find a way to get a grip on the situation before this thing totally snowballs out of control. And this is where you have to get your wits about you. Otherwise, you're going to succumb to some serious and warranted existential horror. And that's what, people like Lovecraft really drove home. And this is how shadow people, sleep paralysis are thrown into the mix. It's that is also very Lovecraftian at its core. And the siren and the shadow people are actually, to my own surprise at the beginning, pretty much two sides of the same coin. And the cultural significance of the siren is that many of the Greeks consider the siren as like this daymare, so to speak. Dreams like that you would, because you have, when you imbalance your circadian rhythms and have like a super long nap during the day, especially like in the hot sun, you often have like really bizarre dreams, and it just it throws your body into a different state of consciousness. And they labeled those strange, sometimes unsettling dreams as the siren, in the same way that people have throughout history have labeled the name nightmare comes from the shadow people's sleep paralysis. Essentially, it's a mare of the night, like a lady of the night, which is the succubus that comes and sits on, or incubus that sits on your chest and strangles you. And the succubus and the incubus essentially being representations of the dark anima and animus. See, these things have followed us throughout history from the beginning of organized culture and tradition. We wouldn't have demonology as we know it today without these things. These are the cornerstones of it. And it's
interesting interesting to me that they're both linked to sexuality, the succubus and the incubus.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's like it brings back around like this Freudian kind of concepts for us.
Yeah, and for anybody, any listener that is unaware, Carl Jung was actually like a protege. He studied under Freud for many years, and eventually parted ways because he thought that Freud put too much emphasis on like this wish fulfillment, and he thought that he didn't put enough emphasis on what I guess you might say lies underneath the wish fulfillment. Because sure, you could say that wish fulfillment is involved with these types of things, but it goes so much deeper and again penetrates to the idea of the union of opposites and the shoreline of and the free will of the psyche. So yeah. But to I guess put a cap on that a little bit. The siren, obviously not as overtly horrific as like a hag of sleep paralysis. And it really drives home the whole follow your bliss thing, because following your bliss is what the siren has adapted to feed upon you by. Yeah, because it's a sweet song, and it's causing all the sailors to not only dive overboard, but swim to the shore of the siren. And in the mythology, Homer describes not only the bones of sailors who have died at the shore, but people near death, starving to death, just sitting there listening to the siren song, waiting for a chance to get some sort of attention from the siren, and they're going to die there too. So that's the bliss of ignorance right there. You're dying at the feet of the siren.
Wow, man. I mean, like, just from a psychological standpoint, that's great. Like, following your bliss, it's literally, you're getting stranded on this like desert island, chasing
Absolutely.
this shit that doesn't necessarily even, it's just like Admiral Akbar would say, it's a trap.
Right. And that's psychedelics at their worst as well, for anyone sour about that. And like, we'll stick that knife in the wound, because that's real, man. And that is why sometimes the bad trips and the bad dreams and the best horror movies are like some of the most cathartic, because they tell you something about yourself that is largely inaccessible in regular life, more so than bliss, because bliss turns into an escape instead of any sort of real knowledge or understanding. But yeah, so you have to pay homage to those things. That's what I say about like something like Sympathy for the Devil, because for me, in my dream work, which eventually extended into ceremonial, like ritual work, of actually summoning the Great Mother herself and trying to reconcile this dysfunctional relationship with my anima and penetrate through the dark aspects and find some sort of common ground. Because I don't claim any sort of enlightenment here, of course. Like if the only thing that I feel like I can honestly claim is a bit more lucidity. I feel more aware of the ebb and flow of these instincts and a sense of free will. And I just feel more comfortable and at peace with myself. And that's what these things are really about. And I had to realize that the anima is only dark. It's only an aspect of the shadow until you take the time to get to know it. And that's how a lot of things are in life. So it's and that's how you get rid of it. Addiction, like you have to confront the things that are causing you to form these maladaptations, these improper coping mechanisms. You got to uproot them, which is a very Buddhist notion. And when you uproot something, you just take the power away from it, as the metaphor would illustrate. And I guess that is the metaphor of the dive overall, is you don't really know what's under there until you go. And some of those things are going to be things worth saving and worth understanding. And some of those things you're going to have to eradicate. And you shouldn't go about chasing dragons unless you're prepared to do some slaying. You know what I mean?
Yeah. So man, I have like two great places to go. I'm not exactly sure where I'm going to go just yet. But so there's this, there's a podcast called Cosmic Keys. I don't know if you've ever heard of it.
Yes, I've heard of it.
Okay. So they do a lot of tarot stuff on there. I'm not associated with this podcast at all, but one of the hosts on it is this lady named Scarlet Ravenwood, and she blew my mind. They were talking about like having like a psychiatric crisis, and she does tarot work. So she starts talking about the moon card. And I'm sure you're familiar with it, but just in case you're not, listeners out there, it's a moon between like these two towers, and there's like this craggly road between them. And on each side of the road, on one side there's a dog, and on the other side there's like a wolf. And where the road terminates is a body of water, and this like crab-like creature is coming out. And this lady starts talking about how this card represents like a psychiatric crisis, and like the road and the dog and the wolf it's like the dog is like civilization or culture, and the wolf is like nature. And at the end, where this crab is in the water is like the monster that you have to kind of like overcome and fight to get to the other side of this psychiatric crisis that you're having. And I wanted to bring this up because it seems to me like a lot of your book is talking about this, going into the water, dealing with your shadow self, or like these dark fucking things that are going on with you, and emerging out the other side. Do you have any thoughts about that?
I mean, you put it almost, essentially as well as I could have. I could illustrate a bit more. I certainly have a lot of personal experience with that tarot card. It recalls a lot of my life to mind. Because you're absolutely right, and that is like a running theme in the book. That tarot card is often associated. It's a very polarizing card because it's a card of great discovery and mystical insight in some ways, but in other ways, it also denotes hysteria and madness, and that's the polarity of the wilderness right there. I mean, even Dante is amidst sheer madness, but that is the place where he finds and hears the call of Beatrice.
I was taken aback because I've done a lot of research and work on tarot cards, and I never really heard it framed that way. And I maybe I just dodged it or missed it or whatever. But when I heard her talking about it, I was like, holy shit, and you got the lunacy business, and it's like all right there.
Very like a werewolf almost.
So that was the other thing I was going to say is when we were talking about the wilderness, last year I did a huge kind of series on werewolves. It was called The Sermon of the Wolf, and we did a thing called, one of the episodes was called Werewolf at the Boundaries. And it's all about, it's like, if some of these sorcerers or wizards put a belt on, and that's what caused them to turn into a werewolf. And I was always like, okay, great, it's a werewolf belt. But I never really thought about it. But he's putting the belt on because it's midway between, his upper half and his lower half. It's like between like his genitals, for lack of a better word, and like his mind, or like his higher self. And it got into all these stories about how werewolves would go to the pig pen on a farm to transform. And the reason is because the pig pen was the farthest thing from the house, but the closest thing to like the wood line. And when I was reading in your book about you guys going out into the woods, this is what I totally was thinking about, was like, you were crossing the threshold, past, this point in civilization, where in the werewolf stories, it was this pig pen, and you were like heading out, and that was kind of like at the root or whatever. It was the pinnacle of like this ritual that you guys would have.
Yeah, absolutely. And everything you just said is such a great example of how folklore and mythology play such important roles in actual psychological principles and even heuristic methods of learning, and being able to achieve different states of consciousness even.
Yeah. So you were just talking about like summoning the Great Mother And I wanted to bring this up because on the show, when I talk about alchemy, I'm usually talking about it as a metaphor or whatever, as a unification of the opposites, the, masculine and the feminine, as above, so below. And I think it was really fascinating how you were dealing with it, and that you kind of have a different point of view because you were looking at it as, this shadow work or this therapeutic act, and the as above being like the higher self and the as below being like your lower self, and also how you were wrapping up this the duality of the female and the male, like within yourself. Does it make any sense?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I was hoping that you could talk about that a little bit.
For sure, and that's another reason why I use the term heuristic. Half of that is for all the like orthodox esotericists out there, because there's plenty of people who follow different doctrines where they very much subscribe to ancient rituals still, like to a T. And I don't want to. I'm not really trying to argue with those people. I think that there's a place for that and a use out of that, and that I don't argue with those people in the same way I don't really argue with like a good-natured, honest-hearted Christian or Buddhist or anybody at all. So that in mind, I tried to take an empirical approach to all this, hence this the subtitle. And I wanted, like, what are the cornerstones? I wanted to ask the question first before I actually sat down and did any of it. What are like the cornerstones of the psyche that mysticism and this spiritualism overall seems to be trying to grab hold of? And I found Hermeticism to be make the most sense and be the most inspiring to me, because it really seemed to be the most concise with its imagery and metaphors and symbolism. And it really articulated the juxtaposition of the masculine and feminine. And it's important to remind people that we're not so much talking about sex in there, although that eventually plays its own part in the equation. It's more of like the proton and electron. These are forces of nature that don't inherently denote any sort of gender or sexuality. But anyway, so the way I see it is I like to think of the Holy Trinity, except I think that Christianity does a huge disservice not giving the feminine its due day. And it's weird that I guess it's kind of cool, but also weird that Catholicism shoehorns the Mother Mary in that way. I feel like if you're gonna do that, if you're admitting that the mother is the mediator between you and God, then why is she not involved in the staple, like this Holy Trinity? So I see it as the Great Mother, the Great Father, and the Logos. The Logos being that identification of self-consciousness and how you interact with the world. It's that mediator. My impression of that mediator is Hermes, whereas, but not exclusively. Whereas I think it's an archetype, and Christ fits that role. The Buddha fits that role. There's many different things, and I think a lot of it. I actually had a 32nd degree Freemason tell me this once. He said that religion and spiritualism are not only like geographic clearly, but they're indicative of your more instinctual states of consciousness. Like if you're born in a place that is predominantly any one religion, then you should take note of it, because those are the things, whether or not you agree with them, are like deeply catalyzing ideas and events and trains of thought within your culture and society as a whole. And that, depending on how far you want to take it, is indicative of your karma and all sorts of things. So I sat down, and after feeling like I made up my mind about this, there's that Holy Trinity, and then there are the other things as well. That's not it. but that is the core. That's the pillar. The 3 is the magic number. That's your triangle right there. And it's pretty much hermetic to a T. And I had already developed this this train of thought leading towards the anima and the Great Mother. The anima being the derivative of the Great Mother, like the mediator, because the anima represents you coming across the fact that there is an opposite and making some sort of organized, like positive, strengthened relationship with that. So, and when you get to the Great Mother, that's the cornerstone of the psyche right there. It's one of the cornerstones. And so I sat down and I said some hymns and some I drew some sigils and lit some incense and some candles. I gave an offering and performed a ritual and got myself into a transpersonal hypnotic state of consciousness, essentially. Should I go further? Should I explain what happened?
Yeah, I mean, if you would like to, or I can just move on to the next thing.
Yeah, no, I have no problem. So from there, in the book, I paint the picture a little more with the mermaid, the siren being involved. That happened a little bit during this trance state I was in, but more to the point, it was this serious, overwhelmingly powerful and humbling and comforting Great Mother, where it was very much like, I see the Great Mother as something like Kali, who is the Vedic goddess, the Hindu goddess, and one that's very loving and nurturing, but is very wrathful to her enemies or even her followers who, disrespect her in any way. And it's really like the mother pulling out the belt and whooping your ass. There's something to be said for that, and that's why I think Lilith is so complex and something that is usually seems to be a little bit harder for people to wrap their heads around in the West. But she's the same thing because people can't seem to make up their minds about whether or not she's a demon or a goddess, and it's like she's basically a little bit of both. And that's where the dark anima plays a role, because Lilith is associated with the Tree of Death. She's a queen of the Qliphoth, and she's also the inspiration behind the succubus and the shadow people of sleep paralysis. So Lilith is very much, other than the Mother Mary herself, she's probably the biggest figure that we have in the West that represents the Great Mother.
Yeah. So, all right. So when you're talking about confronting like this shadow self or these negative things, you talk about you're talking about these things. Can you kind of talk a little bit about how the Tree of Life and the Tree of Death, as like how it relates, how these concepts relate to that kind of struggle?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are probably, I admit, there are more than likely different ways of going about this, because people seem to find benefit out of, Buddhism, just as one example, and that while it has its own a Tree of Life concepts in there, obviously doesn't have the Tree of Life as a massive cornerstone, the same way that Kabbalah does or something. But the Tree of Life is actually pretty pervasive throughout any given religion or spiritual tradition, even the ones that weren't associated with each other. So it either denotes far more conversation between the mystics of antiquity from east to west than historians give credit for, or it denotes archetypes like intrinsically. And I think it's both. I think it's both. So the tree of life is inescapable the more you want to understand comparative religion and psychology, because it's recurring so often that you're missing a huge point of data if you don't at least try to get a frame of reference to this stuff. And so I've studied a bit of the Kabbalah with a K, which would be the Hebrew, and then the Kabbalah with the Q, which is more of the like alchemical renaissance that many adventurous Christians were associated with back in the day, among others. So
Madonna, we're talking to you.
Yeah. And it's the, like the 10, it's very Neoplatonic, the sense of the grand ideals of not only the psyche, but the cosmos. And it relates back to the conversation of free will. And the way I look at it is these things are inevitable. It's like, it's inertia it's like the laws of nature from the plants to the psyche. And that's why alchemy is fascinating, among many other traditions, but alchemy especially, because it's like really getting to the core of that two-way street between a law of nature and a law of the psyche, and how they really are identical, at least when you dig deep enough, and get some of the outlying factors, because obviously there are things indicative of the human experience, but we all stem from the same thing, and that's what the tree of life is. So you can't really argue. Like, again, there might be different symbols that you could use, but you can't argue that these things are legitimate and demonstrable. And the same goes for the tree of death, because the tree of death is the inversion of the tree of life, almost like a Mobius strip in a way. They're conjoined, and it's often classically described as the shells or spheres around the Sephiroth, or the spheres of the tree of life. So the Sephiroth and the Qliphoth, Qliphoth being the tree of death, and it represents this distance between you and God, divinity, the mystical state of experience, transpersonality. It's the celestial rose of the cosmos that Dante sees the vision of when he has the mystical union with the mind of the psyche of God, and the beatific vision. Although Christians wouldn't like me using in that context, that's archetypally speaking absolutely what it is. The beatific vision is not. It's not something that only a saint can have. That's why I call myself a mystic and not like another religion, because I think that these things are directly accessible to any given human being. It just takes a little bit of effort.
Yeah. So, okay. So the tree of life, the reason I'm bringing this up again is because I think it's super interesting. And I'm just kind of thinking about it as you're talking. The tree of life have like these 10 Sephiroths, and the way that I kind of describe it is that they're lenses. And above the tree of life is this thing called the Ein Sof, or the original thought before creation.
Mm-hmm.
And the Ein Sof filters in through these different lenses of the Sephiroths. And the point is that they go through these different lenses all the way down to like the Malkuth, or like the bottom, the root. And I never really kind of put it together, embarrassingly, that the Qliphoths are shells around, they're barriers around these lenses, stopping the light from the Ein Sof to get into or through or down to like the next level. So,
right.
Yeah, so when I'm thinking about that, I'm like, oh, well, I could totally see how this deals with, around like the Sephiroth that has to do with mercy. If you have like a strong Qliphoth around that, then, that's kind of where you need to work at, or work you need to work on that area of your life, bro.
100%. And this is why the tree of life has a feminine association to it, because it's not that femininity is negative or demonic at all. It's the tough love of the mother herself, and it's a law of nature. It's what happens when you don't pay proper respect and have a proper relationship with your own inner femininity, whether you're a man or a woman, sexually speaking. It doesn't matter. We all have these relationships, and if your mother is being wrathful, then it's because you haven't honored that relationship. And the same goes for the father. These things that's why Abel was punished, like we talked about in the last episode, is because he didn't honor the relationship. And granted, I'm not, or Cain rather, excuse me. I'm not an advocate for Abel per se, because I've always related to Cain a lot more, but Cain clearly didn't get all the fine print details, and that's what alchemy is. Mathematic in that sense. You have to understand the fine print details. So the Qliphoth is not something that I used in my trance states. It wasn't anything I used ceremonially, because I tend to associate that more with Solomon's lesser keys, and the things that, like, my friends and I experienced on the psychedelics in the wilderness. That's very Qliphotic. And while those are also indicative of hungry ghosts, that's where you get into like the serious potential for hysteria and just straight up psychosis and things. So you gotta be careful, and that's why I certainly am not an advocate in the strictest sense of something like demonolatry. But you have to understand these things, and if you want to get to the heart of something, you have to diagnose it, like I was saying before. And this is why I'm fascinated with the fiction, the premise proposed in the fiction of existential horror, because that's the threshold of the Qliphoth right there. And in order to understand your role in existence more thoroughly, you have to understand the less than pleasant ideas associated with it.
Yeah, so I got like one last thing if you have time. I know I'm taking advantage of your time. We're way long, but
No problem.
I was hoping that I could. Okay, so you were just talking about like your trance state in your book. You talk about the idea of using tarot and hypnosis. So I was hoping that you might be able to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, and I as you brought that up, I figured. Not that it needs a whole lot of elaboration, but for anyone interested in getting the book, it also explains similar work that I did with the Great Mother, with the Great Father and the Logos. So I try to build a framework of the alchemical processes of the psyche in ways to, like I said, not get enlightenment, but just to get a clearer, healthier, perhaps more lucid relationship with the different states of the psyche, and trees of life and death being the anatomies of the Great Mother and Father, and the Logos being the ways that you interact with those anatomies. And then you get into things like divination, fleshing out your relationship with those anatomies of the Mother and Father. And that's why I find the natal chart and the great Platonic year of the zodiac very interesting. And I explain divination a bit in the book by using the classical examples of tarot, numerology, and astrology. And I do my best to elaborate the fact that all of these things have relevance, but it's a heuristic relevance. It's crafts that were meant to be perfected over time. And that's why you see, you have a Chinese zodiac and more westernized things. And astrology becomes updated with modern astronomy. And some people point to that and say, like, well, look, it's being updated and adapted. So how is it even right to begin with? And that you're missing the point. Like, that is the point of it, is to continue to build and expand upon it. So with tarot, I found tarot to be not only the most accessible for me in many ways, at least like a really good introductory to this kind of stuff, but also it seems to be the most applicable for the majority of people, especially in getting into these trance type states of consciousness, even if it's just a glimpse of it, because I've done, it's been a little while, but I've done many different tarot readings just for people I know, like case studies essentially, and wanting to familiarize myself with the symbolism more and more. And I seem to always get interesting results. It really fishes something out of the unconscious mind of the person. And I just explain to them, like, I'm not necessarily trying to tell you your future. You don't have to look at these cards as divine in and of themselves, but it's giving you a randomized story. And I draw 10 cards. My card reading is associated with the Tree of Life, and by proxy, the Tree of Death. But there are different ways to do it. And I tell them, like, the fact that these cards are very intricate symbolism. The symbolism has lots of history and is well studied, and there's a lot to be said about it. But the fact that it's being a randomized story here is giving the fertile soil for you to project your what exists within your psyche. It's a projection of the shadow. There's shadow work right there. And that's what the mind does. You give it random stimuli, it's going to try and find the most light. It's going to use Occam's razor to try to slice the pie up. And that's the whole trick. It is the whole trick right there. And that is not, that doesn't invalidate it. That doesn't make it irrelevant. It's makes it all the more poignant and powerful. And like I said, it doesn't matter who you are. I've done tarot readings for skeptics, atheists, for spiritualists, and just people who don't have a hard stance one way or the other. And they always find it interesting, it seems, because you don't say yes to a tarot reading unless you're at least curious, and that kind of suspends the state of disbelief, which again doesn't invalidate it. Like, suspending a state of disbelief is part of the whole trance state itself. It's an important role.
Yeah, we talked on the last time you were here, we talked about the importance of getting out of the box.
Yes. Absolutely.
And saying, even if you're a skeptic, or especially if you're a skeptic, I suppose, saying yes to a tarot reading is like the way to get out of the box. You're like, okay, well, I'm open to this. Let's see what happens when they start flipping these cards around.
100%. And I like to recommend tarot because it is so accessible, it seems. I've done I Ching readings similarly because I really like the I Ching. But most times that I've done readings of the I Ching for other people, it doesn't land because the I Ching's a lot more cryptic and relies really heavily on Chinese cultural symbolism that people in the West aren't familiar with. So I feel like I get it. Like, I see, and I try to explain it to them, like when I've done it for friends, and they're just like, I don't really get what you're saying. But I've never had to do any of that with tarot at all.
Yeah, it's like,
it seems to click with people a lot.
It's like when you're trying to explain to people speaking Klingon, you're like, here it is. Here's the syntax. Here's everything. Like, this is Klingon. And you're just like, yeah, I still don't get it. Like,
yeah. Good way to put it.
Not saying that the I Ching or the Chinese or the Klingons. That's not what I'm saying. That's just the most outlandish example I could pop into my brain.
Oh no, yeah, I totally get it. I'm sure someone is getting all up in a PC fit right now, though.
What? Hey man, I've had a lot of fun talking with you again, and just the best of luck on your book and the rounds that you're making on the podcasts and stuff. It was just great. I was wondering if you'd like to throw down some links or where we could find the book.
Yeah. So, I mean, if you want, my Facebook is not extremely private. You can find me on there if you have any questions, you want to start a conversation. I'm Anthony Tyler in San Leandro, California. You can email me at divemind667@gmail.com if you want to talk research. Email tends to be more beholden of like long text. If you're trying to like, hit me up if you want to talk about a dream or something. If you're a troll, I won't respond. If I find out, and if you're cool, I'm always down for a conversation. Otherwise, you can always go check out The Last American Vagabond. That's my former website that I still have plenty of association with, even though I don't post there anymore. And get the book, of course, at Amazon.com. It's The Dive Manual, Empirical Investigations of Mysticism by Anthony Tyler. And dive or drown, ladies and gentlemen, dive or drown.
Hey, yeah, man, the book's fascinating, and I loved it. I loved it all. The Blue Lodge, your Blue Lodge stuff. I can't pronounce the name of your group. I've tried a billion times.
The wine.
What is it?
Beaujolais. It's a wine.
Very good. Thank you so much, Anthony. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah, well, thank you, man. I as well appreciate it. It's always a pleasure having a conversation with you.
Yes, sir. Hey, just a reminder about the Cabin Fever Combat link on the website. To help fight the boredom, as we're all stuck in this oppressive quarantine zone. As this media-induced panic spreads across the country, I thought that I would post one of my graphic novels, The Jinn Jihad, on the website for free in an attempt to help you pass some time. I hope you enjoy it. All you got to do is just head over to the website, Advertise.com, and click the Cabin Fever Combat link. I busted it down into chapters so you can... I thought that might help pace it, so you could just do a little bit a day. Thank you, guys. And if you want to hear some coronavirus news, I don't even know what I'm going to say because I'm fucking sick of hearing it, but I have something fun planned. I have something really fun planned. So stay if you want. But if not, I will see you next week. Actually, I'll see you in a few days.
Thank you for listening to this episode. Send an email or visit us on social media to let us know what you think about this topic. And please remember to leave a 5-star rate and review.
I'd like to call to order this secret conclave of America's media empires. We're here to come up with the next phony baloney crisis to put Americans back where they belong, in dark rooms glued to their televisions, too terrified to skip the commercials.
Well, I think...
NBC, you are here to listen and not speak. I think we should go with a good old-fashioned public health scare.
A new disease. No one's immune. It's like the summer of the shark, except instead of a shark, it's an epidemic. And instead of summer, it's all the time.
That is so...
Now, I hate to be the guy who derails what everybody else loves.
He loves being that guy.
But, Janice, we do have standards. This can't be a made-up disease. The only moral thing to do is release a deadly virus into the general public.
We do have something we've been holding on to, but it hasn't been tested. Get over here, NBC.
Well, we certainly believe in testing, but Wow. Oh, yeah.
So, we've got our deadly disease. Now, we just have to blame it on something that's in every household, something that people are a little bit afraid of already. House cat flu is coming, people. The Center for Disease Disinformation predicts with some degree of probability that the house cat flu might spread in the following hypothetical outbreak pattern. So petter beware, that warm body on your lap just might be ready to destroy your tender fiddles. Springfielders are advised to stay tuned for more information if they experience any of the following symptoms: mild thirst, occasional hunger,